Welcome, everybody. This is Avoiding the Addiction Affliction, brought to you by Westwards Consulting, the Kenosha County Substance Use Disorder Coalition, and by a grant from the state of Wisconsin's Dose of Reality Real Talks, reminding you that opioids are powerful drugs and that one pill can kill. As always, I'm Mike McGowan. I decided to title this episode, It's Not Your Grandfather's Beer Anymore. I thought it was an apt title. In order to create a sales or a sagging alcohol beverage market, the alcohol companies have expanded their product line to include a whole lot of alcohol infused products from beers to sodas to teas. And we're going to talk about all that today and the marketing of it with Melissa Moore, who's a certified prevention specialist and owner and trainer of M3 Consulting. Melissa has over 25 years of experience in public health education, prevention, community engagement, and coalition building, especially, and I love this part, in rural settings. She's based in a town in Wisconsin called Medford, where I think they make pizza, right?
100% home of the Tombstone Pizza.
That's
You know
right.
it.
What a thing to be knowing. Welcome, Melissa. I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you.
Hey, Melissa, you know this. I know this. I think our listeners probably know this, but some probably don't. Americans, and especially young Americans, are drinking a lot less alcohol. That's a good thing, right?
Absolutely. When I look at the things we should celebrate in public health, young people drinking less is definitely a public health win, and we should build on it. But from a prevention perspective, fewer people drinking is good news. That means the norms are shifting. That means that young people are questioning the role that alcohol plays in their life, and that the whole idea of not drinking has become more accessible or acceptable, I should say, and accessible. That as
Yeah.
well.
And
But there's definitely work to be done. When we look at the alcohol industry, when we look at the marketing that happens, even if youth are drinking less over 30 days, we know that when they are drinking, they're drinking more, especially amongst our young women
hmm,
out there in communities across this country. So we do need to look at and keep an eye out on the marketing that's making these new products that are out there more fun, more fruity, more perceived as harmless, and really making them easy to consume. Alcohol doesn't taste like alcohol anymore.
no, talk about that a little bit because canned cocktails are everywhere. And you know what? My kids drink this. Can I mention this? These little skinny can stuff,
Oh, yeah.
right? And some of it is just water. It's just a different way to get water. But the canned cocktails, you can't tell the difference between them sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I've had a number of stories over the years of many of these are packaged in very familiar
Yep.
brands to try to avoid saying too many brands here, but the alcohol industry has really been adapting these products to make them look lighter, be sweeter, make them easier to drink. And that's why we call them ready to drink cocktails, right? Even when they're stronger than people realize. So whether it's the canned cocktails, the hard teas, the hard seltzers, the spiked lemonades, the ready to drink cocktail bar, it's really blurring that line. And a lot of them, as you alluded to, those packages look exactly the same. They show very familiar brands with the same exact logo that we've seen all along. When you look at those ranges of how strong they are and what people think that they're getting, it's not unheard of that when these industries are diversifying their products to attract new customers, to bring in all those endless flavors, those familiar brands, and those different serving sizes, they know exactly what they're doing at a low price.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when they first started doing this with things like Zima, which went nowhere. But then all of a sudden, at every event, especially young women, seem to be drinking White Claw, right? And White
Absolutely.
Claw had low alcohol content, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, one of the moments that brought me great joy as a person that grew up in the 90s, and you mentioned Zima, was somebody referred to White Claw as the Zima of this generation. So I actually had a little bit of humor with that, but like all industries, they've adapted. If you check out their website, using them, you mentioned them as an example, but if you go to the White Claw website, you're going to see that they have stronger options.
Yep.
It's called Surge. So from 5%, now it's 8%. They have spirit-based cocktails that are 7% alcohol. We see them in this 8-ounce can, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's cute. It's an 8-ounce can. They're trying to be mindful of what that serving size is based on the alcohol content. But just because it's in a small can doesn't mean that's the case because there's other pre-mixed margaritas that are out there that are 12.5% alcohol by
How,
volume.
what do
There's
you
Long
know?
Island iced teas that are 13%. those cute little buzz balls that everybody sees. And there's so many other flavors or other brands out there, but the ones that kind of look like a little grenade, those are 15% alcohol by volume. And for how much alcohol you have in there, you're looking at about 4 serving sizes. So we're seeing more and more of these products where people may see that this packaging is, oh, I only had one drink, but the reality is that it's closer to a binge in a can.
A binge in a can. Oh, maybe I should rename the episode. That's a great line. How do you know what the alcohol content is? Is it listed on every label?
It would be, yeah. They would have some restrictions on it's listed on every label, it's listed on your boxes. But the reality is, again, when you look at so many of these look the same, they're packaged the same, they're in the same coolers. If you're at a convenience store or a gas station or a grocery store or liquor store, they're all packaged and they all look very similar. So unless you look closely, 5% alcohol is not the norm anymore.
No. And I saw there's like everything else nowadays, there's a social media challenge, right? Drink the 4 pack of what did you call it? The binge in the can.
The binge in the can, yeah.
Yeah, to drink the 4 pack, and you can get pretty annihilated if you end up slamming that.
Absolutely. The math really does matter. When we look at standard serving sizes, a standard beer, light beer that's 5% alcohol would be a 12-ounce can. So if we look at that kind of as the mark, and we look at the recommendations that have come through and continue to be supported by the American Medical Association of 4 drinks for women or 5 for men in approximately 2 hours. If you have a 12-ounce can of that margarita that I mentioned, that's 12.5% alcohol, that's about 2.5 standard drinks in the one can.
Wow.
If you drink 2 cans, you've already hit binge level for many of those folks. So when you talked about taking a 4 pack in, you're closer to 10 standard drinks. And we've gotten so efficient with our binge drinking that we had to actually add another. The National Institute of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse, the NIAAA, actually created a new definition called high intensity drinking, which meets that standard of 10 drinks or more. And I just look at a lot of these products, they are packaged that way. I was actually at a brewer game and I was sitting there drinking my summer flavored beer, standard alcohol content that you would see in many different standard regular beers. And I saw a person drinking another brand, Four Loko, very popular. There's a number of them that look that way, but they're 24 ounces. They're 4.7 servings of alcohol in one can. So to my standard beer, and somebody's drinking one of these, you can imagine that person probably didn't even make it to the second inning.
And that was sold at the stadium.
That was brought in the tailgating aspects, but a lot of those 4.7 serving cans, just as an example, they're sold right at your gas stations next to your energy drinks. They look exactly the same, and a lot of the times they're even cheaper.
It's funny, you and I live in an interesting place. I've talked about that before here in Wisconsin. When I talk about binge drinking all over the country, and I talk about 5 or more drinks at one setting, only in Wisconsin do I get asked how long is one setting.
And the definition is looking at 2 hours.
Yeah.
About 2 hours.
Right. But people want to stretch it out and say, do I have a problem with it then? And then when we get to chronic drinking, right? We lead the country in all of those categories usually in our state.
Yep. Yeah, it's almost this badge of pride.
Yes.
Oh yeah, Florida kicked us out of bars because we drank too much. I think when we look at the state of Wisconsin, the culture is there. It's not uncommon in many of the other states that I've visited through my time doing what I do, educating on drug trends across the country. People from controlled states, they're really surprised at how normalized or visible alcohol is here. And many times I think we just look right past it. And the reality is, the industries know exactly who they're targeting. They know exactly when to put those ads into social medias, put those ads on TV. And it comes down to understanding things like, what are the products that are available? What is the pricing that we're seeing? How is it being promoted? We mentioned White Claw earlier. Teddy Sims is partnering up with them to help promote this new expansion of their brand. And just looking at where the placements are in Wisconsin, there really is little restrictions on where they can be sold, how they can be sold, in what quantities, in what strengths, and what flavors. Well, some other states do have some restrictions on that. So we do need to focus on it across the board. But in Wisconsin, we do have a little bit more challenges.
For those of you who are not from Wisconsin or haven't been here, if you ever visit, you're never far away from a gas station. And part of the reason for that is because of all the things that they can sell. You can find alcohol in gas stations, grocery stores, Monday through Sunday, pharmacies, right? You
Yep.
can get it anywhere.
Pharmacies, dollar stores are all over the country. They're in many rural areas where there's maybe not access to a grocery store or a gas station. So we have really expanded the footprint of the different alcohol types because I think a lot of the times when we've talked about alcohol and we look at these ready to drink cocktails that are high alcohol, low prices, tons of flavors, partnering with familiar brands that are popular with youth like Sunny D, Minute Maid, Monster, Arizona Tea, Simply, Sonic, Lipton, Fresca, Welch's. I could go on and on. The hard Mountain Dews.
Oh,
There was actually a store that had a display of hard Mountain Dew. It was in the liquor area. However, the liquor area was integrated amongst the rest of the store. It wasn't a separate place. They had a handwritten note on it that said, "This is an adult beverage, 21 plus." And it just goes to show that if a person's not familiar with these brands, not familiar with looking to see if there's that little circle on it that says what the alcohol volume is, kids could be walking around with these in schools and people won't necessarily even know about it.
at the grocery stores that I go to, Melissa, when you enter the grocery store, the first thing is the liquor department right adjacent to the produce department. I don't know if it's like that in every state. I don't grocery shop in every state, but that's just stunning. And they will oftentimes offer samples. So
Oh
you
yeah.
have people and not just samples of beer, samples of shots, right?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. The samples of the different there's hydration drinks now that look like a Gatorade bottle. I consider them the same when you look at ready to drinks. I've seen samples or discount bins. You walk in and there's
Yes.
this grocery cart full of reduced price alcohol. You look at your counters. I think a lot of people, we've gotten so used to paying at the pump at convenience stores, we forgot to go in. When we pay, what are the little samples? The little airplane
Yeah.
mini bar bottles, which again, they're 1.5 servings in one bottle. I
Right.
buy my big gulp or my big buddy. Get my booze. Some people just grab it. It's easy to steal, especially when they're at the register. What's going to stop me from getting in my vehicle, pouring it in, and driving away?
And especially if it's accessible to put it in your hand.
Well,
And who
absolutely.
better to steal? I'm not throwing them all under the bus, but what did we find when we did the cigarettes and whatnot? It's put on the counter for young people. Back in the cigarette days, convenience stores used to be reimbursed for stolen product.
Did not know this.
Yeah. Tells you everything you need to know, right?
And like I said, I've been in places where literally there will be a cooler with ice and single beers. Why am I selling a single beer at a place that I have to drive to and then drive away? We need
Yeah.
to ask these
Right.
questions and take opportunity to look at what policies are in place out there. I've even seen places in neighboring states, and I know this is happening here too, where they'll package, here's my lemonade, and here's 2 bottle of booze and a straw, and I'm going to sell it right next to the checkout. So I can just grab it, mix it, and go. And we've become very accustomed to this. And like I said, those ready to drinks, it's not just the ones that are in the can, it's the frozen slushies, it's the icy pops, the things that we grew up with, the ice tubes that everybody got all over themselves all the time. It's the pre-mix shots, it's the buckets of Fireball or Captain to take. It again, I look at low prices.
And working in prevention like you and I do, we're always seeming to play catch up, right? I read, what did I read? The sales of canned cocktails rose 40%
Yeah.
last year in 2025. I don't know where it started, but that's a pretty big raise, which means we're playing catch up, right?
Absolutely. I think even if overall alcohol sales are softening, the industry is going to continue to look at how they can maximize this. So, looking at those increases, Nielsen actually showed that there was a 12% of the total alcohol dollars of sales in 2025 were ready to drinks. Even just looking at it's over almost a 4 billion with a B dollar industry. And it is something that as we look to the changes in how we drink our relationships with alcohol, as we're looking at making things more accessible, more fun, there is just so much with these products that is definitely attractive. Definitely is something that is bringing people into that fold.
Speaking of fun, isn't that the way it is marketed? And it always has been, right? That is the point of marketing. You're not going to market it and as unfun. And we're
Right.
seeing that now. We're in the middle of the World Cup here, and article after article about out of country fans running Boston dry of alcohol in a proud way.
Yep.
And they're having so much fun, as though that fun is unattainable unless you're running the town out of alcohol.
Absolutely. In Wisconsin, we have our own little phrase, the whole drink Wisconsinably, right? And it's just the whole idea of the phrase of drinking responsibly. It is an industry phrase. It is something that we've seen in changes with recent recommendation changes that there's that vernacular is part of it. And I think it goes back to American Medical Association is the experts in this when we talk about the impacts that alcohol is having on our community. We for some people responsibly is not at all. For some people responsibly is one not drink, one serving. We need to understand that. We need to focus on education. We need to look at access. We need to look at marketing. We need to look at the communities in which we live, how things are sold, where they're sold, how they're displayed, how easy it is to confuse the alcohol versus the non-alcohol versions, and looking at our policies, how are we going to keep them on the shelves? We've learned this from tobacco. You mentioned tobacco
Yep.
earlier. Education matters, but so does that price, so does that placement, the advertising, the limits, the changing norms, all of it.
9 avenues here, so we'll hit all of them one at a time. Back in the day, for those of you who are younger, you might not remember this. We had billboards everywhere. Joe Camel, candy cigarettes. They actually called them candy cigarettes with real
Yep.
names, right? So we're seeing the same thing now. If you haven't seen it, those of you who are listening, if you haven't seen it, simply Google Hard Mountain Dew. And the packaging is literally indistinguishable from their other flavors, right? You have to know what you're getting.
Like I said, if I were going to be popping up different pictures of the different brands out there, Hard Mountain Dew is just one example.
Yeah.
Another one, I think a lot of people, you've heard of Mike's Hard Lemonade, and then
Yeah.
you have Mike's Harder Lemonade because the 5% wasn't strong enough. Now they need to do 8 to keep up with things like White Claw and Surge. But they even have things that are like Warheads, popular candy. They have Monster was probably one of the original Alco Pop that was available. There's a lot of people that I've talked to working in prevention as long as I have, but never even heard the term Alco Pop anymore or heard Alco Pop before. So just looking at these products, it's intentional. They made it to look that way, to normalize it. And when we know when our perception of risk goes down, our use goes up. It definitely impacts what we're doing in the community.
Not to throw an older generation under the bus, but I'm guessing that 40 plus year olds aren't looking for alcohol infused warheads.
Probably not. I think you're probably 100% right. But when we look at some of these infused coconut waters, the kombucha teas, the different, I would say probably hard sodas is more of a younger person too, but it used to be just one kind of flavor, or one kind of vodka, one kind of whiskey. Now we have 100 flavors of Malibu. And this is what we're seeing is now they're condensing all those flavored spirits down in these very convenient, ready to drink cans.
We need to do this every time we talk about this because you mentioned with a smile, for those of you not watching on YouTube, the federal recommendations. A safe amount of alcohol is
From a public health lens, generally, less is better, and the lowest risk choice is not drinking at all, right?
0.
Zero. And looking at that guidance, it is very generalized. Let's put it that way, where it's putting the onus back on the individual. But what we find is these are perfect examples. Unless we know what it is that we're actually drinking, unless we know how much is a safe version for us, it comes down to education and it comes around to self-reflection and awareness. But I said, we continue to go back to the experts. And I look at the AMA, we know that alcohol consumption is tied to risk for cancer. We know this. We've had studies upon studies of this. It's recognizing and understanding what that standard drink is. You go out for your old fashioned on the weekend, it's not one drink. If you have your pint of IPA, the alcohol content in that, your pint is 2 servings, to just really understand what that looks like. And I think on the general, it's really about supporting that public awareness, supporting that labeling, understanding what those standard drinks are and what's included in what it is that we're consuming or not consuming. But we know that there are populations like our young people, our adolescents, as well as pregnant women should not drink. We know this.
You know,
So we do need to continue to reinforce that.
we do. And I think there's a friend of mine who does what you and I do. And she's in front of professionals and she
Mhm.
has to, in almost every workshop, talk about what a pour is,
Yep.
Pour, that it's a 4 ounce wine, that it's how much alcohol, because people don't know how much the equivalent factor is. Like you said, a drink is not a drink.
Absolutely. I just think of all those times where, you ask someone gets pulled over for an OWI and
Hmm.
ask them how many drinks did they have, and they said they had two. What was the drink that you had? Go back to the
Right,
Long Island. You're looking at 5 servings of alcohol in one drink,
right.
minimum, typically, if they pour it how they're supposed to pour it. So I do think it does come down to that. It's not about alcohol is healthy in moderation. We need to understand that just the links. It's about if adults choose to drink, keep it limited. Understand what that standard drink is. Avoid binge drinking and recognize that alcohol does carry those risks, even with lower levels in things like cancer.
Yeah. So where do you go? So how do we get there? Because we did do it. Part of the reason I love doing what I do is because it helps. It works. When you
Mhm.
educate people, they make better decisions, as we're seeing from young people cutting back on alcohol in general. So in a prevention aspect, how do we get to where we got with cigarettes, where the younger generation is considered basically a non-smoking generation? Take vape out of it. We
Mhm.
haven't done the same prevention with vape as we did with cigarettes. Where do we go with the whole Alka-Pop and canned beverages? What do we do
Well,
that works?
I think we do need to, the message really needs to be that even though we're seeing reduced use rates amongst our young people, we need to keep going because that problem is not solved, right? We need to continue to look at celebrating that, but then also looking at the prevention aspects of underage drinking, binge drinking, impaired driving, alcohol related injuries, the long term health harms, and really putting all those things together because being aware is not enough. We do need to look at things that are happening in our communities. We do need to make sure that those are selling. Having an alcohol license, whether you're selling it at a class A where you take it, purchase it and take it somewhere else away. If you have a class B where you're going to your restaurants and bars and you're sitting down to have a meal and you're consuming on site, your class C's looking at our influx of wineries and just how policies have changed over time. It really is looking at it as a bigger picture. Recognizing that Wisconsin, we are a home rule state. Not all states have this. If you have an alcohol beverage commission or ABC board, they do have some limits and some restrictions on how things are available, sold, quantities, the potencies. In alcohol, we have a little bit more flexibility or we have more power as a home rule state. So looking at those licenses, it's a privilege. It's not a right. It's you need to put these things in place. And we could talk about the fact that we haven't raised a beer tax since the person landed on the moon. We could talk all day about alcohol density, of how many alcohol outlets are based amongst our population. You may not have a stoplight in your town, but you may have 4 different gas stations and 2 grocery stores selling in addition to a local bar or 5. We can look at the limiting the sales hours, days. We can look at happy hour specials. We can look at enforcing those underage drinking laws and doing things like compliance checks to make sure those that are selling are doing so in a way that is within the law.
And I think the other thing on the flip side of that, I think the thing that you've done well and people who work in prevention is convincing young people that they have the skills to have a good time and to cope with life as it comes at you in a good or a bad way without supplementing it with alcohol.
And I think more and more young adults are choosing not to drink. And when we look at this, that making that choice easier, making that choice safer, making that choice a supported choice. It's a great example of the cultural changes that we're seeing. This generation, they're asking more questions about alcohol and health. They're
Hmm.
asking more questions about how it's impacting things like their sleep, their money, their long term wellness. And our prevention messages need to continue to evolve. We can't just keep hammering on the same points, but we also need to tune in the fact that there is other industries, including big cannabis, including our intoxicating hemp industries, that are saying, you know what, alcohol is poison. Drink this stuff, it's safer. We're going to continue to look for ways to live on every day. If we're looking to escape, if we're looking to relax, if we're looking for our mental health, to get away we're going to continue to evolve, and these products are going to continue to evolve with it, because we haven't even talked about a lot of these ready to drinks. There's a lot of them that are packaged the same way, and they have the intoxicating hemp, and the in legal adult use states they have the cannabis drinks, they have all the different relaxation drinks that are out there. My social media feed is full of them. So it is, you mentioned earlier, it's about we've been reactive. We need to get out there and see what people are seeing and hearing. Absolutely.
Part of the reason I also love to do this is for those of you listening, Melissa just set up Melissa Moore Part 2, because I'm going to convince her when we're done with this to come back and talk about those very things, which I was going to do anyway. That's why I'm
There.
grinning, because there's all sorts of stuff out there, and knowledge is power.
Mhm.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you tackling this and talking about it and your work. This is the kind of work, for those of you that don't do it, that if you get frustrated and burn out, you're no good. So you have to maintain optimism and clarity and hope. And you clearly have
Mhm.
that. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll put the links to M3 Consulting in the blurb for those of
Okay.
you listening, watching on YouTube. We hope that you are safe and educated.